Hi, my name is Valerie Hill, and today I will walk you through the Unanet purchasing process. First, let's look at the high-level overview. This slide describes the overall Unanet purchasing process, where we start with a purchase requisition that turns into a purchase order. Both documents have their own optional approval process, which can include a customer approval and a project manager approval. When the purchase order is approved, the system can generate period-sensitive commitments reporting. If you elect to have your subcontractors entering their timesheets and their expense reports in your Unanet system, your commitments will decrease real-time. Additionally, your vendor invoices will automatically be created from your subcontractor timesheets and expense reports just at a click of a button, giving you a three-way match between PO, timesheet, and vendor invoice, or PO, expense report, and vendor invoice. If you elect not to have your subcontractors entering their timesheets and expense report into Unanet, then you'll be able to enter your subcontractors' time in a vendor invoice, giving them a two-way match between your PO and vendor invoice. You will also be able to enter material on the vendor invoice by inserting item code, quantities, unit measure, rate, and amount. A vendor invoice approval will also be available. And the process can be repeated using the mod process, where you can create a PR mod and subsequently a PO mod. Now that we have seen the overall process, let's log in my Unanet system and giving you a little tour of Unanet purchasing. After logging in, I will navigate to my Financials menu. We now have a Purchasing submenu for Purchase Requisition, Purchase Order, and Purchase Order Assignments. For now, let's select the Purchase Requisition menu. We have our traditional search and list page, where I can search for specific purchase requisitions. I can search for specific document number or specific time frame, specific requester, etc. The list page displays the purchase requisitions based on my search criteria. Using the plus icon, I will go ahead and create a new purchase requisition. The purchase requisition document is extremely flexible. Only 5 fields are required. Everything else is optional. You can also insert internal and external comments. The internal comments is intended for useful notes related to the PR document by and for the people inside the organization. The external comments will be displayed on the purchase order documents. We also added user-defined fields to the purchase requisition and the purchase order. Those user-defined fields will help you keeping track of the information that is important to you. Notice that we have created a document totals and PR balances widget to help the user understanding the status of his purchase requisition. Now, let's start entering some labor lines. Entering labor lines will indicate that you wish to hire subcontractors. Again, all the fields are optional. If the requester wishes to indicate specific dates for the period of performance or hours, rate, labor category, he is free to do so. But if he doesn't know the information, we suggest to leave the fields blank. Leaving it blank will allow the purchaser to fill the purchase order lines with the appropriate values. If the values are populated on the purchase requisition, then the purchaser must use the values indicated on the PR. For the sake of this purchasing demo, let's create a second labor line. Each line can have attachments. The attachments can be carried over to the purchase order, and ultimately, they can be emailed to the vendor with the purchase order form. The expense detail lines are intended for any type of expenses that doesn't require a quantity. As an example here, we're entering travel expenses. And the item detail lines are intended for material, widgets, or anything you want to purchase that requires a quantity, a unit of measure, a rate, and an amount. Those items will be eventually added to the purchase order and the vendor invoice. On the vendor invoice, you'll specify the project type, and if the project type is billable, those items will be included on your customer invoice. You will be able to bill those items at a specific bill rate or alternatively at a specific markup percentage. Those billable rates or markup percentage can be coming from the item master list or specifically identified at the project level. After I entered all the desired PR lines, I can submit my PR for approval. The approval groups available depends on the user logged in and his configuration. The user must choose the appropriate approval group. Now let's pretend the PR got approved and the purchaser is ready to create the PO from the approved PR. I will first navigate to the PO search and list page. I will click on the purchase order icon to create a new PO. I search on my PR number or description. The fields are automatically populated from the PR values. Notice the commitment date and fiscal period. That will be the fiscal period when the commitments will be displayed in the different reports after the PO is approved. Let's quickly look at an example of a JSR report showing the commitments. We will modify the JSR report to display the committed values. Now, let's fill or modify the purchase order information. Remember that the vendor field will only be mandatory at submit, allowing you to do market research, negotiation with different vendors, and tracking all the necessary information via attachment, comments, and UDFs. Although I'm creating a purchase order related to a PR here, remember that a purchase order can be created without a PR based on a system property. The UDS values carried over from the PR but can be modified. On the labor detail screen, you have the PR read-only grid. Those are the approved PR lines. I can select to bring both PR lines into the PO editable grid. The description can be modified if desired. I can choose to change the period of performance dates for a smaller date range. I can also select to create the PO lines with less hours than what was originally approved on the PR. Remember that if the values was left blank on the PR, the purchaser is free to add a value on the PO. If the field was populated with a value on the PR, the purchaser must use that value on the PO, which explains why certain fields are grayed out. I can also decide to create a third PO line using the same PR line. Basically, one PR line that splits into two PO lines. I will be using the same concept for the expense lines, where I moved the approved PR line from the PR read-only grid to the PO editable grid. Since I'm not inserting a specific person's name in the persons field, that PO line could be used for multiple subcontractors' travel expenses. When submitting the purchase order document, the purchaser will choose which approval group he wishes to send his purchase order to. Now let's pretend that the purchase order got approved by all the approvers. We now have an open purchase order. Notice that the summary page is still available. Even after a purchase order was approved, users with the appropriate access rights will be able to modify certain values. Now let's move forward in time and look at the purchase order that has multiple mod documents. We created the consolidated all view page. This page allows you to see the history of any purchase order. The PO balances widget shows the approved PO and its mods, while the posted VI shows all the vendor invoices that were created against this PO family. Notice that each document number have drill down capabilities. Let's look at the PO lines. If I click on a specific line, I will see the history of that PO line. I see all the PO documents that affected that PO line. In order to create a purchase order mod document, I simply click the plus icon beside the original PO document for which I want to create a mod. Notice that the mod document number is editable by the user, allowing you to match your real-life contract number mod to your system mod number. Now under the labor detail screen, you have your PO read-only grid, which allows you to modify an existing PO labor line. And you have the PR read-only grid, which allows you to create a new PO line from an approved PR line. For the purpose of this demo, let's modify an existing PO line. This user wished to extend the subcontractor's contract for another month. Let's discuss the vendor invoice overage. Your options are limit, don't limit, and PO funding cap adjustments. The option limit will stop you from posting a vendor invoice that exceeds your PO line amount. The option don't limit will not stop you from posting any vendor invoice even if you exceed your PO line amount. Your PO funding cap adjustment will allow you to post your vendor invoice but will put in a at-risk GL account any amount that exceeds your PO line amount. When your PO line funding is increased, your at-risk amount will automatically be reversed by the system on your next vendor invoice. I will now create a new PO line from an approved PR line, putting another resource name for that PO line. Remember that each line can have specific attachments, where the attachments can automatically be emailed by the system when emailing the purchase order form to the vendor. I will submit my purchase order mod for approval using the appropriate approval group. When the PO is approved, we have created a way to match the subcontractor timesheet and expense reports to a PO. It's called purchase order assignments. The idea behind this process is a lot like the current project assignment, but it's for purchase order. You can see here that purchase order 18 line 2 can be assigned to Rena for a specific project, task, and date range. I simply click on the plus sign to create the assignment with the PO values. When Rena will enter a timesheet for this project, this task, for this date range, the system will automatically stamp the timesheet cell with the PO number and PO line, consequently, immediately reducing your commitments for that purchase order. Now, the last step of the process is to enter a vendor invoice. I select my vendor and my purchase order number and enter my vendor invoice amount and date. Because this vendor invoice is related to a PO, as soon as I save, the PO balances widget appears displaying the history of the purchase order and the vendor invoices posted against this PO. The vendor invoice is now divided into 3 sections: labor, expenses, and items, letting you create vendor invoices lines for those 3 types of purchases. On the detail labor screen, if for a reason or another I did not let my subcontractor enter their timesheet in my Unanet system, I can choose to enter their time using the PO read-only grid to create a vendor invoice line and enter their hours manually on the vendor invoice editable grid. At this point, all the fields are mandatory because the information will get posted to the GL. If the information was not provided on the PO, I must enter them here. When I'm done entering my vendor invoice line, I can submit my document for approval. Now let's look at a vendor invoice where I did let my subcontractor enter their timesheet and expense report in my Unanet system. When the user entered the PO information in the vendor invoice summary section and save, the matched timesheets and expense reports would automatically be pulled into the vendor invoice under the Match Labor and Match Expenses screen as shown here. I can choose to defer those transactions if need may be. If my purchase order was configured to calculate funding cap adjustments, those would be calculated on the vendor invoice and displayed into the funding cap adjustment screen, as shown here. The PO funding cap adjustment is calculated at the line level and the summary level. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching the Unanet purchasing demo. Thank you and have a great day.